Welcome to the Collaborative Synergy podcast, where we bring together passionate, driven individuals to share their unique expertise, experience, and insight. I'm your host, Candria Rauser, founder of Collaborative Synergy Consulting. At Collaborative Synergy Consulting, we believe in the power of collaboration to achieve extraordinary results. Each episode, we'll dive into engaging conversations with industry experts, thought leaders, and change makers who are dedicated to making a difference. From project management and business analysis to leadership coaching and team building, our guests will share their knowledge, skills, and stories to inspire and empower you. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, learn from the best, and discover new ways to harness the power of collaboration. When we come together, we create a synergy that amplifies our strengths and propels us towards success. So let's connect, learn, and grow. Welcome to Collaborative Synergy Podcast. Welcome to today's From Ideas to Ink episode, where we're going to explore a creative leap from concept to published work. I'm your host, Candria Rauser. Today's guest is author Dave Pratt, someone I have had the pleasure of knowing for nearly 2 decades. I first met Dave when I was a student in his project management classes at our local college. And back then I was soaking up everything I could about project structure, strategy, execution. And Dave was such an inspiring and knowledgeable instructor. So fast forward to today, and we're now colleagues, both teaching at the same college. And it's been a joy to reconnect and swap stories and reflect on how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. In 2012, Dave authored the IT Project Management Answer book, which still sits on my shelf. Actually, I have it with us today. And recently, I discovered that he has taken his experience writing nonfiction and applied it to fiction. So he's crafting some compelling 5-part novel series called Home Team. And this November, he just recently released the 3rd book. And I couldn't be more excited for him. So Dave, welcome to the podcast and congratulations on your new release. I am so glad that you're here to share your journey, your insight, and your encouragement with all of us who are dreaming of writing a book one day.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you for the podcast and to share about one of my favorite things, and that's writing. Is one of my mentors described as a pleasant affliction. I do it. It's what I love to do. So any chance to talk about it, I'm open for it, and I'm just happy to be here with you.
Dave, I'm so excited to hear more about your writing experience and how you've taken the ideas to ink. Are you ready to jump into some podcast questions, or would you like to give the readers maybe a little bit about yourself before we jump in?
Myself, that's harder to do. It's harder to talk about myself than just about any other topic. I guess by way of very brief bio, I was born in Bakersfield, California, and raised between there and Anchorage, Alaska, for my first 18 years. From then on, I was in the military, did about 20 years there, taking a short break in service to build flight simulators up in upstate New York. It was during that period of time when I left the military is when I started writing. A compelling point is that I was actually started writing because as this new second lieutenant right out of Washington State University, a senior officer confronted me and said, "Pratt, you can't speak, you can't write, fix it or you'll fail," and walked off. Sort of staggered me. So I signed up for a correspondence course and got hooked. I learned how to write short stories, and I just got hooked and started publishing about 10 years later. Anyway, so beyond that, right now I retired from the military, and also in 2000 also retired from project management, mostly around 2022, I guess. And now I live in Middle Tennessee, having moved from Washington State not that long ago to follow my grandkids out here. So that's about it. That's all that's interesting. Besides, and I guess since it shows up in my stories, my other to-do things are training horses, which I've done for 40 years, and martial arts, which is a lifelong affliction. So.
Do you like a certain breed of horses, or?
Oh yeah, anything with spots. I like pintos and paint horses. And my last one, who I've got a picture right here on the wall next to me, named Bo, was a tank. He was just a big, heavy-boned, heavy-muscled, gentle guy. I got so many stories that we don't have time for that he was involved in, but he was my buddy for 28 years. So
very cool. I don't know if I knew that you liked horses.
Oh yeah, don't get me started. Me and a couple of students in my class, we could bore people to tears for hours. So that's just funny. On horses, and the worse than that is probably talking about martial arts, because I can talk about that for hours as well.
I do know you like that. Yes, that didn't surprise me. Okay, well, we'll get started on today's podcast. So, what first sparked your desire to write fiction after your work in project management, and how have you and your life experiences kind of shaped that writing path?
Well, I've always loved writing, and I love fiction. When that officer, sort of braced me in the hallway, which was sort of a staggering thing to happen when you've been in the Army for 2 months, and a captain does that to you. I reached out and signed up for the only correspondence course I could find, and that's the Writer's Digest Institute's short story writing course. I learned more in that class, that correspondence course, than I learned in, 16 years of education. And I got hooked, just absolutely hooked. I published 3 non-paid professional articles probably within 2 months, 3 months of graduating, and then didn't publish anything for 10 years and never gave up. I ended up with a decade of depressing rejection notices until I finally think I wore them down, the publishers and the editors, and they started publishing everything I wrote in magazines. And then, it came time to teach project management. I realized there was such a hole in the knowledge that was being passed around, and books that were so thick you couldn't possibly read them. So I saw a niche that needed to be filled, just in my opinion, and I wrote 3 of those. And then after that, sort of this fiction bug came back around. Just came back around, and I started writing Christian suspense probably about, I guess, 5 years ago. That's when it started. And the amazing thing about that is that after years of rejection of writing fiction manuscripts, that first publisher I sent the home team to published it and signed me up for a 5-part series. So it was like a dream come true. That's too
That's
much.
exactly what came to mind. Dream come true. Right when you were talking, I was thinking, wow,
Yeah.
what a cool outcome.
Yeah.
I remembered back when you were talking to middle school, I remember we had some assignments where we had to publish some things that we wrote, and there was like a young authors magazine, and I sent a couple things in there. And then we had like a little book that our middle school did, and I sent a couple things in there. And so I got published in the one at our middle school. And this one that I sent to the young authors magazine, they wrote back and said, "This is really great. You should turn it into a song." It was supposed to be like a longer poem.
Oh.
So I kind of joke around, like, I don't know, maybe I should write songs, but
Well,
I don't know how to sing, not that well anyway. So it's a little harder.
it depends on what you're after. And, I know we haven't discussed this, but when I was 16, I was a pretty troubled youth, and my stepmother, who was a writer, had published, came and said, "Why don't you try writing?" She was desperate to kind of get me under control. And I wrote really, really horrible poetry. It was just awful poetry, which I published later on when I was in
Yeah.
college, right? Which actually came out in some chapbooks and things like that. And seeing your name in print and that people read it, it's like a door started opening. Like, I could give people this stuff.
Yeah.
I could have an effect on people. For me, that becomes the driving force, is that maybe if I do this right, and probably more true in Christian suspense than any other place I've ever written, as long as it's a really good story, there can be a message in there that people might grasp onto, and so far that seems to be happening. So yeah, that's the hook. You hit it right. That's the hook. Right.
Absolutely. Seeing my name. That was pretty cool. Seeing your name is pretty cool. I'm like, I know that guy.
Absolutely.
I was holding up your project management book. I know this guy. I took his class.
That was so
That's
long
fun.
ago. Oh my.
Yeah, yeah. How did the idea for your home series kind of come to life?
Well, the home team was the first book, and I wrote that from beginning to end before I sent it to a publisher. And that came up because I retired from the military in 2000, and it wasn't until 6 years ago that my wife got me to open up about my military history. I just didn't. You'll hear that from a lot of military folks, that we don't talk about it. Shortly before that, I came to Christ. I actually became Christian. And so here I've got my military stuff on the wall next to me, which still feels weird. But I also have a mild case of PTSD from, in mild case, not explosive. I can generally be okay. But having had that and dealt with it, I was sort of forced to reconcile my faith and a lot of the misconceptions that come out of Christianity and the misconceptions about the conflict between being a warrior and Christianity. I had to reconcile it, and there's Home Team. There it is, right? And I'll never admit to it. I'll deny it if anybody quotes me on it. But Consuelo, the nurse that's in the book, is a lot like my wife, and Sam is a lot like me. So, I mean, the kids guessed it right off the bat. But so that inspiration came from that conflict and that need to reconcile. Plus, I've had a lot of exposure to the sort of stuff that's in the book, and through friends, through my own stuff. And so I wanted to make an action adventure sort of book that exposed that issue a little bit, not preachy, but that sort of came through on the bylines and the sideway, the sublines, and I think it happened. So it came out of experience and a need for me to reconcile it. It was sort of a therapy thing for myself, but it just came out as a really fast-paced, fast-read action book. So that's how it came out. And of course, the rest of it, the series, I've got 4 team members on the Home Team. And 3 of the books out of the 5 are each about one of those characters. They take the lead. The one that's came out on October 28th, Homesick, is about Leah McCarthy, and about her experience and what she's gone through, and another action, very fast-paced read. But it also touches on some issues like active shooters and whether that could actually be a conspiracy terrorist sort of approach, which is something that people talk about in the quiet places. And also PTSD, which is something that people should talk about, and then applies some other technologies like artificial intelligence and virtual reality, which is being used for treating PTSD. So, the characters are kind of driving the stories forward, but then this stuff comes up that I've been around, related to, been into, and it sort of like just takes the story forward for each of them. The exception of that is Home Team 2, where I bring in a different character. And Ellen Evander is an ex-Washington State Patrol trooper who gets tied up in the human trafficking and takes that as a battle. Too strong to need help, ultimately realizing that she does. And so these stories kind of come out of these characters that sort of showed up along the way and the issues that you see around you, but within a fast-paced story. I don't like boring reads, so in a fast-paced action sort of based story.
You mentioned that you use yourself and your wife and some other people to kind of help you think about how to develop your characters. When you start your stories, do you start with a character or a scene or an outline, or kind of what's your process to evolve from your idea to kind of a finished first draft?
Yes.
Yes,
No,
all of it.
sometimes. So like when it was Sam Anthem, the main character in Home Team, I didn't really intend that to be me, but when you build sort of the character, you start constructing the character and putting them in situations where they resolve conflicts and are embarrassed or have to learn something, and funny stuff and humorous stuff. When you get there, you can't help but slip in what you know, which is where you've been. So whereas Sam has, some similarities in terms of how he acts, what he can do, and things like that with me. I really started in that case with a character, but no, that's not entirely true. Let me back up. I really started in a situation in Mexico because my wife is Mexican born, and she's told me so much, and we visited, and I wanted to put a character on the edge of a woods in Mexico because it's so beautiful. But I also wanted them being involved in rescuing somebody, and on a mission that could do positive things to change things. And so I plumped this character down, and first thing I wrote was that he's on the edge of this forest and this bug the size of his hand crawls onto his foot and wants to make lunch out of him. And he makes some casual little response. And that's where Sam came to be. He started then, right then. So the scene was first because of the beauty, right? And when you can describe a situation enough that people can see into it, and you don't do it so much that they're isolated from their own imagination, but you do that, and then the character sort of comes up to populate it, if that makes sense. And I didn't know that Consuelo was going to be in that hut in the middle of the clearing in front of him. I didn't know that until the 3rd chapter, I think. So scene first in that case, character second. But in Home Team 2, it was definitely character first. Home Team 3, character for. Same thing with 4 and 5, Finding Home and Home Run. Those books all start with a character because I've already got them. So the answer is it depends. And I'll say that I write, I'll go into this scene character thing for about 2 chapters. And I'll just write. And at the end of the second chapter, I write an outline because I've got enough of the character. I've got enough of the scene. I kind of got an idea where we're going to go. And then I fight with my characters all the way through the outline because they get a life of their own. They're going to go in their own places. It's just the weirdest thing to describe, but it's also the most fun when they go down a rabbit trail. And then you can get back on your outline and get somewhere because Home Team ends differently than I ever imagined and better, way, way, way better. So the answer is a little bit of all that, a little bit of all that.
I love that they create a life of their own. I like the dialogue that's happening in your head as you're coming up with the ideas.
Well, they live in my head and my thoughts like they're friends. That when I wrote a book as part of a novel writing course called The Remington Man and Coyote Run, Abe Chesterfield is there, and Jennifer is right there, and that's been a long, long time. They get a life of their own and they stay with you, right? So either that or I'm schizophrenic and we'll just have to see how that works out, right?
I work out to your benefit. That's okay.
We'll see.
As you're writing, do you write daily, weekly, and bursts? Kind of like what works best for you?
Well, when I wrote Home Team, I tried to write 5 days a week for 2 to 3 hours a day. My goal was always about 2,000 words a day, and trying to get to 95,000 words was the goal, somewhere in that area. I think in reality, I probably wrote 3 days a week at best, somewhere around 4 hours on a good day, because I got grandkids and family matters and just goofing off and procrastinating as well as, chores and so on, just like everybody else. And so, that's my goal now. When I had a 5-part series, I had deadlines for each one. And there's nothing tougher than a deadline because you can't procrastinate very long. But yet you can't go thrashing forward because a lot of this, what we have a saying in project management, when we talk about our stakeholders, right, is that once somebody believes in the value of a project, their subconscious will work on that 24 hours a day, except when their conscious mind gets in the way. We know that, right? With writing, it's the same way. I can't force stuff. I have to force myself to write. But the good stuff comes when it churns around and it comes out when I realize how a scene should go. I didn't get any sleep 2 nights ago because I was working on a new project. And, and that's just how this works. So with this deadline, I was still probably writing at most 4 days a week, at most 3 hours a day during that time, but sometimes at 4 in the morning, sometimes at 1, sometimes at 6 in the morning. You write, Ken, and as far as I know, every writer that I'm familiar with goes through the same thing because we have other things in our lives besides writing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have those other things like families and spouses, right? So, yeah, so that's the goal. It just doesn't always work out as well as we'd like sometimes, but it's an affliction. So once we start, we're going to get done. Nothing stops us from getting done with a book. So.
I was thinking as you were talking, like, oh, I totally hear the project manager and you coming out when you're talking about goals and deadlines and all that.
Ask your question, Kendra.
I know. I was thinking because I have started writing multiple times thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book or I'm going to write a class or I'm going to build something, whatever it is I wanted to do at that point. And so I have this little idea book actually that I set to the side. And as I'm doing things, kind of like a Kanban board or some other concept, I just quickly jot down whatever that idea is and I come back to it. But a few times it's been late at night and I just had to get it out. And I actually started writing, like literally pages of writing. It was just flowing so well. And I don't know what it is, but like there's this point when you're going to sleep where your mind just kind of starts to relax and it just flows. And I was up one night, all night. I just came downstairs so I didn't wake anyone up, grabbed my laptop and started going. And I've saved it. I haven't gone back to it, actually. I was so into that one. I should probably go back to it. But yeah, cool that happens to you too, not just me.
No, it does. And my wife gave me she gave me a little leather bound book with a strap around it so that when these ideas come up, I'm writing them out. I don't write on Sunday. So this morning I was there scribbling the notes came up on Sunday. And, for this new book that I'm writing that my publisher doesn't even know about. But the ideas are those are the things that come to you. But I'll warn you, one time I stayed up all night writing a novella. This is decades ago. And I forgot to save it as I was typing it. And we had a computer crash. And literally, I've never seen it since, is the document turned about 45 degrees and slid off the top right corner of the computer and disappeared. So make sure you save it, right?
Like a really bad dream. I hate when that kind of
Yeah.
thing happens, when you put all the time and effort and knowledge and you're feeling so good about it and then it's gone. You're like, no.
We're just finished the edits on book number 4, Finding Home, and my editor sent me from the publisher the final edits, and they weren't there.
Yeah, it's just not
And
the same the second time.
she was like, afraid because she'd lost everything. So yeah, that's something we all worry about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Was there a moment as you're going through your writing that really kind of made you laugh or learn something unexpected in the writing process, other than don't forget to save?
I got a couple examples for you. I mean, besides not saving, I save now automatically. I've been down that path. But I think, one of the funniest thing is when I wrote the Remington Man and Coyote Run for that novel writing course so long ago, I sent the manuscript off to my writing mentor who wrote, I called her my smut writer, my friend, but she was a romance writer and she was highly successful. And so Zelma Orr, you can't make up a name like that. But she looked at my manuscript and deleted the entire last half of it. Half of it, she said, does not add to the story. Get rid of it. Rewrite it. So I'm like, oh, okay, fine, right? Because I respected her. And so, lesson learned, right? I wrote it, and it's a good book. I like the book. I self-published it, which has its own issues because I didn't have the benefit of a good editor. But so then I wrote Home Team, and that was 95,000 words, and that was, I thought, pretty sparse. I mean, in terms of brevity is the key to a fast-moving story, right? And so the editor got done with it, and it came back at 85,000 words. And what happened to the 10,000 words? He says we deleted them at the end of the story because the ending was right there at 85,000 words. It made it faster, more punchy, and more fun. And he was right, but it was sort of deja vu, right? A decade and a half later, I hadn't learned, right? So, I mean, that was sort of funny. And the other one that was really funny is in one of the books I wrote, there was a horse that was involved, and the guy was riding a horse, and a big surprise. And the guy, he falls off the horse on the edge of a cliff and gets away from the bad guys through no planning of his own. He just got turned into a klutz and fell off his horse. And I had one of my readers come up to me in a conference where I was teaching and said, that was so significant. It was a profound statement about him departing from his horse, his life. And I'm going, he fell off the horse, right? People will read into things that you write, and I'll paraphrase this in a different way in a second, and you will never have total appreciation for what they'll see in your words. It's like when a coach that coached me in college in my sport, when I saw him 15 years later, and he said a few things at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was working out by myself, and it just changed everything for me. And so I saw Rex Davis, 15 years later, and I explained to him, and he goes, I don't even remember it, I'm sorry. And then he said, don't ever underestimate the value of a few words said at the right moment, and the fact that you may never know that they were said, that they had value. And so that was funny for me until I thought of what that person got out of it. As much as I didn't intend it, it worked. And that's what writing's about, is giving people that value.
I could totally see how he would say, in life, people fall off their horse all the time, right?
I know.
Question was, did he get back on the horse? Or in this case, he didn't. He ran off, but later, hopefully, he did get back on the horse.
Yeah, he did. He was the hero. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned some of your characters earlier, and this next question, how has your background in project management shaped your approach to writing came to mind? Because I was thinking about, as you were developing your characters, if anyone listening to the podcast maybe has done some work in project management, they'll be familiar with what we call personas, right? And so when we think about agile project management, a lot of times we build these personas out in kind of it looks like maybe a Pokemon card, I say, or like a baseball card, right? It gives you a little bit about the background about that persona, things that they need or things that they do. And so I'm curious, my daughter likes to write and she does these little versions of her own. I forgot what she calls hers, but they're personas. Do you do that for your characters?
Do I develop a persona for my characters? Absolutely. I have, out of the 5 books, I've probably got about 50 pages of character descriptions. For the 4 prime members of the home team and Ellen Evander of home team 2, they're all very, very much bulletized lists of their characteristics, both physical characteristics, emotional backgrounds, how they behave, things like this, what they look like, obviously. So yeah, I do that. Sometimes they develop and change during the course of a novel, and sometimes it's my own stupidity that causes that, what we call them continuity error. This when my editor finds out that she was supposed to have green eyes and over here she has brown and over here she has blue. But I think what even more important than the physical stuff, because that's easy to change, is the emotional reactions, the physical reactions, their physical capabilities and limitations, because no hero is impervious to everything. It just isn't. They aren't. And in my case, these books, these people are definitely heroic in in their drive to help people, but they also have limitations and shortfalls, and you've got to understand them so that when something comes up, it's going to be believable. It's not something that they just pick an answer out of the air. It's got to be able to relate to them. So yeah, personas, yeah, I create them. I don't know any writer who doesn't. Otherwise, these characters tend to, and I've seen it in some writing recently. It's from some authors that seem to be writing probably too fast compared to what they used to write, and the characters look shallow. They just don't have a lot of depth without this persona thing, or what I call a character sketch for each one. I don't see how you can go forward with any sort of credibility, continuity, and coherence in the storyline.
In one of my books, I don't know if you've heard of the Enneagram. The Enneagram is kind of like a behavioral persona assessment that you can take, and it talks to you about how you show up when you're your best self and how you show up when you're not your best self. And in this book, I like it because it had this idea of kind of creating a boardroom table. And so there's 9 different persona types. And I think as a writer, this would be super helpful, but they use it for, preparing for a meeting, or if you're trying to think
Oh yeah.
about, did I cover everything that every persona would need? Did I deliver the message in a way that speaks to all the personas? I was just curious, have you used anything like that or disc or anything to kind of help you build out that deeper level of what they are like?
I'm really glad we're good friends for a long period of time because I don't. I belong to a number of really pretty decent writing groups, Association of Christian Fiction Writers, which is really big, as well as Northwest Writers Association and some others. And a lot of times we have speakers that tell us about new writing tools, and there's a ton of them out there. And I have a ton of friends who are writers that use tools like that. I just don't know how you possibly do it. It's like way back when we had it in project management, we had this thing called function points that we applied to everything we did. We had actors and where we built scenarios where they and what, it was so constraining that we couldn't actually get the project done. We'd actually kill the project's budget writing these things and never get started. So it faded away pretty function point analysis is what it was called. I think for me, being who I am, since I do rely on an outline and the character sketches and things in those first 2 chapters that kind of get it going, I would feel too bogged down by the tools. And you took my courses in project management, and my axiom for that whole thing was minimum effort, maximum gain for the project, right? You're tired of hearing it, I
I
know,
was
right?
totally gonna say that for you. I was
Right,
waiting.
right.
You got it.
It is, it's true. And for me, writing, it's that. It's like, you know, get your outline and then go, right? Get your characters and go, right? Otherwise, you're going to lose that like when you got up late at night and you wrote that stuff and it just flowed. You're going to lose that in having to stop and address the tools, right? And in project management, any tool that takes longer to manage than it does in terms of contributing to the value of the project is worthless to me. And there's a whole bunch of them. My my daughter-in-law and my daughter use a couple of project management tools that I would never touch, right? But I'll say this, it works for them. So yeah, and for the writers that you use these tools, if they're getting going, and I think it provides some structure for them that they need based on their style. So I'm not going to condemn them. That's the last thing I do. It's just for me, no way am I going to use a tool because it's like taking me out of my domain, which is to get that story going, keeping it moving. Don't slow me down for a tool set. Don't do that, right? And if I find a gap in the understanding of the character, I want to go back and fill it, and that's half the fun. So nope, don't use those tools, right?
It
I
makes sense.
don't.
Is there anything you do use from project management, whether that's like a schedule or anything that
Oh
you have
yeah,
found super helpful?
there's no question that, it's hard to take the project manager out of me after so many years. In the Army, I was for 20 years, I was an accidental, what we call an accidental project manager. Then I discovered that there was actually a way to do things that was way, way better, and got into traditional project management and agile solutions delivery and stuff like this. So yeah, you need a vision when you start. And that comes out of that scene and that character and then flows into the outline. The outline is your roadmap. And if you tie that when you have like a contract for your book, you're tying it to a schedule for a deadline without a doubt. So you have a timeline and a roadmap. Without a doubt, you're going to have those sorts of things. You're going to have objectives. And from my perspective, the objectives for a project are the chunks of the solution that we're going to deliver for our clients, right? In a project and in a writing project, the objectives are the plot and subplots. No question about it. Are we actually going to bring those plots and subplots to bear? And when you start stacking that sort of stuff, the vision at the beginning and where you have to be at the end, you have your outline and you start stacking the objectives along the way. It's looking just like a project. I mean, just like a project. And then you start filling in the pieces along the way, which is what we do in project management, right? Is to build the pieces so it adds up to the total. And the bottom line is that it's something else you heard me say way too many times as an instructor is we don't deliver requirements in projects, we deliver value, right? It's all about the value. And in writing, it's all about the value, which means that you resolve the conflicts in a way that's the reader is satisfied. The characters change in ways because they must change that so that they are satisfied. So the reader, when they get done, looks at it and goes, that was good. I feel good about that. And that's if there's one thing I've heard, because probably because of all the reviews, and that's the home team ending, and people like it. They really like the ending of it, and that, frankly, unfortunately, contrary to what I taught in project management, I didn't see that ending coming. It showed
No,
up when I got
that
there.
happens though
So
on projects occasionally,
kind
right?
of,
I mean,
kind
we
of
have
does,
those
yeah.
projects where we think we know where we're going and then we find a better way.
Or, you have 400 requirements tracking to all these objectives for a project, and you get to 250 and the client says, good enough, you can stop now, right? Whoa, who knew, right? But
The
yay,
joy of Agile.
yeah, true. And but the value is there, got the value, and that's what we're after. So we don't
Right.
always know how the ending's going to work out. I think in Homesick, yeah, that ending was a surprise too. That will really be a surprise for folks. And number 5. Oh gosh,
You're going on
uh,
way past
sorry. I know. Don't do that. I
in
have
the
3
future.
ideas in the hopper. But in book number 5, the ending, I rewrote it in the middle of the night because I'd sent it already to the publisher, and I called the chief operating officer of the publishing house and said, I need to change the ending. It's just not right. She says, go do it. We want it right. We don't want it bad. And the ending showed up, and it sort of staggered me. It was one of those, it was like, whoa, that was, I'm not sure that I wrote that, right? Because it was
Thank you.
so different. It would put a punctuation mark at the end of the series. So
That's cool. What helps you stay focused and stay organized, whether it's like tools or routines or writing space? I mean, like we talked earlier and I said, oh, I use like sticky notes and I kind of work
yeah,
like a work breakdown structure. I
sure,
lay them out. I
sure.
actually stick them up on the wall and move things around and organize my thoughts. But what helps you stay focused and organized?
Well, I have an 18 by 14-inch bulletin board, and I stick my outline on the wall there, and I have maps that I draw up of like in book number 5 in Home Run. I had a map of the horse ranch that's involved in that because it was such a important issue. So those are some of the little tools, not very significant in really depressing for some of my friends who said, "What? You got a bulletin board? Show it to us." It's like, I'm not sure I want anybody to see that. It's such a mess. But really, what I need is quiet. I need that time and I need rest, so the subconscious has been working it, and the stuff can come out. And really, really important was when I was writing back in Lacey, I would go to Fog and Fern, a coffee shop, and get their coffee and their pastries, and I would be ready to write when I wasn't teaching. And then here, there's a place called Feel So Good, which is a coffee shop with an incredible bakery. So I get my coffee and I get a chocolate chip cookie and I hunker down in my cozy little office here, and that's what I need. I just need to go. And my wife writes me off for the period of time. Right?
Your door's closed. Sorry, out of service.
Well, kind of. We have an agreement though that I leave the door open generally, but that she'll come in and give me a hug or something just to make sure I'm still alive, right? So I haven't stroked out in my chair.
Gives you a new cookie.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, she's pretty cool about it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's great at planning but hesitating to start writing?
That's a tough question because it happened to me when I first started with a novel, and the very first one, The Remington Man and Coyote Run. I knew I wanted to write, but I'd gone to some writers' conferences and learned enough to be kind of daunted. And I took a novel writing course from Writer's Digest as well. And when I sat there, I just sat there and I called my friend Zelma and I said, "What am I going to do?" He says, "Put some words on the paper, dummy." Right. That's all she said. She says, "Just start writing. Don't worry about where it is, the beginning, the end, the middle. Just start writing. Imagine a scene in your mind and write it. This is what I'd recommend to them. Imagine a scene, any scene. Doesn't have to be related to your story idea, but it'll probably join it. And write it in 2 paragraphs with no adjectives or adverbs, no ly words, right? Describe it in 2 paragraphs. What'll happen, and you can, if it's a character you're starting with, describe the character in 2 paragraphs. And by the way, long paragraphs, James Michener was the champion of that. I haven't made it through a book at all with him of reading every word because it's just so many words. But short paragraphs, read well and read fast. Short sentences, read well and read fast. They dictate your tempo. So write short paragraphs. I'm not talking about a page-long paragraph. But do it in 2 paragraphs. Start there. In either case, if you write with the character, the scene will show up on the fringes. Where they're at, where they're standing will show up. If you're writing a scene, somebody's going to occupy it. Some character will occupy it. It might just be a piece of them, a hand or something like that. And that's where you start, right? That's when it starts flowing. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in procrastination. And so if we're not going to write, let's just be serious about it and let's be okay with it. And then when you're ready to write, do that. Because if you're procrastinating, chances are you don't have something good in your mind to put down. So do your procrastination, barbecue something, get a cup of coffee, go for a run. But then when you're ready to come back, sit down and write something, anything, just write something. That's my best advice. Beyond that, let me add this is what I put in that article I mentioned earlier that I was invited to write, is persist, which means keep writing. Learn, which means learn from others who have been through the fire, who write. And that can be through conferences and work in serious writers groups. Most of them are social clubs and they don't give you much. But we need affiliation, don't get me wrong. But those that will teach you stuff. And then have faith in your calling. If you're a writer, have faith in that. So persist, learn, have faith in it, rinse and repeat. That's what you do. And I'm got my 5th novel probably out in another year and a half because it takes that long to publish them. But I'm still doing that, persisting, learning more, and then having faith in it. I can't tell you how many times I've quit as a writer, and I'm not done yet. Right? Does that make sense?
Kind of like retirement, where people quit. they retire and then they're like, "Yeah, I'm retired, but I'm going to just do this other job too."
Well, I don't.
Going.
If you look at my family, everybody's retired now, and nobody's stopped.
Nobody's really retired. They
My
just are
brother,
doing
no,
things that they're passionate about or that they're
my brother
purpose.
who's 86 is working on reconstructing a church, and he's a zoning chairman for his city. I mean, he's like, this is who we are, you know. We do stuff.
We talked about before this call, we talked about passion and purpose a bit and how,
Yeah.
like knowing your purpose is really about knowing what it is that you have to offer others. And it sounds like he knows what he has to offer others and he's still doing it even if
Mhm.
he's retired, right? Because you don't
No,
have to do that only when you're working.
no, it's true, and that doesn't mean it doesn't stop and watch the Oregon Ducks play football, you know. But I don't hold that against him either. But you know, I think that we all have to have something. The truth is that in 1976, the military did a study of people who retired from the military and how long they lived. So this was quite a long time ago when this was done. And military people can retire anywhere from about 38 to 50, and that's pretty young. But the average life expectancy for a military retiree was 11 years. And most of the people who died early just quit. They just stopped. And you got to understand that that's a high intensity job. And to just stop, your body's not ready for it. But if you read all of the literature out there, not to give anything about my future books away, but about dementia and cognitive decline and things like this, they say that learning new things and creating things are huge factors in how early how we develop onset of dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. So it's just good for us. It's just good for us. So I'm keeping going. I will do this in martial arts probably until the day I die.
I think the exciting part about retirement for me is I get to keep doing things, but I get to do things I want without having to worry about a paycheck, right? I think that's the cool part of retirement. Not that you're just going to sit back and do nothing, right? That's not
Yeah,
my goal for retirement. So I totally agree with everything that you shared,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I could
It's
see how
nice to
that
be
would
able to
fit.
do what I love, you know,
Mhm.
no question. Even when there's a deadline, which are really hard sometimes. But yeah, it's nice to do what I love and to be able to say that. I'm blessed.
What internal shift helped you move from I'd like to write a book to I am writing a book?
You know, I think I was sort of driven to it. I'd had some small success with magazines, articles, and some national, fair number of national and regional magazines. And I wrote columns for a newspaper for about a year, a humorous column. And I'd had enough of that, doing it part-time while I was working, doing project management as well as being in the military. And I knew I wanted to do something more because I reflected back on the Hardy Boys, you know, back in the fourth grade, and how those books, I actually digress, I couldn't read until they discovered I had an eye issue. My mom discovered this, I got glasses, and the whole world opened up to me, and I sucked up every Hardy Boys book there was. But I remember that as an escape, being pretty much an only child at that point in my life. And so I wanted to go back to that. You know, I read authors like Anne McCaffrey, who writes fantasy series, the Dragon Rider series. I read Dick Francis. I read Jack Higgins, who writes suspense, right? Linda J. White, who writes Christian suspense romance. These writers, they're incredible, and I wanted to do that. I get chills thinking about it. So just like with the first round, I went and took a correspondence course, and I recommend that to anybody who wants to start. Go get some tools. You know, not, one out of 460 books that are written ever hit print. That's just simply the truth. Mostly because people don't know what to do with them, or they're writing them for other reasons or what have you. It's all fine. But once you take a course and you learn the basics of it, you know, just how to structure a novel, what it takes, and so on. You're sort of forearmed and prepared. So I recommend that without a doubt, because that's what happened to me. I saw this whole world open up, and of course, that's where the Remington Man and Coyote Run came from, and later on, Buried in the Records, which is a story I love. Just self-published, but I just really love that story. But then, you know, nothing happened after that, right? I mean, I actually taught at some writers' conferences, went to more writers' conferences to learn from people. And I just got frustrated. I wrote another novel that's still, what we say, in the can in my computer, fully fledged, ready to go. But I just lost purpose, and I was kind of overrun by other things. And then, you know, I knew I wanted to write, but it just wasn't working out. And like I said, that's about the time that my wife, Rafaela, came in and opened up my history, you know, had me recognize the military. And that's what turned it on, because then I saw something not just creating fun stuff like Burying the Records was a tremendously fun book to write. But it gave me, this is sort of like chance for action and adventure, escape stuff, but also a message that I could kind of subtly put in there that wouldn't burn people down, but would add to the character and how they flow. So for me, that was when I started writing fiction. Coyote Run, Burying the Records, that wasn't it. I mean, they were fun, but the turn was at that point in time where I realized I had something to write as opposed to writing something, if that makes any sense to you, right? So that's when it changed. And that was well after I finished my last project management book. You know, it was probably 3 or 4 years after that. So that's what turned it on. That's what turned me to fiction.
So you gave us a couple tips in there about some steps we could do, go to a class, learn how to write, but is there anything in particular, one small step or doable step that someone could take today maybe to begin their writing journey?
Well, then I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, and that's sit down and give it a shot. Create a character, create a scene. You know, it's so powerful when you do it compared to when you're thinking about it. When you're thinking about it, we can imagine all sorts of things. I lay at night, awake at night a lot of times imagining scenes and stuff. But there's this sense of empowerment when you put it on the paper. And I'll tell you this, to add to that, just actually, to take a very trite phrase and quote it, just do it. Sit down and do it in the quiet. Just do it and be bold about it. And then secondly, feel free to write really badly. Just do the dump and then watch it roll and you'll feel this sort of freedom. That took me a long time to figure that one out. Nobody wants you to write how you think somebody wants you to sound. We see that in academics quite a bit. And it just makes it hard to read the Harvard Business Review sometimes and things like that. But on the other hand, John Cotter, one of my favorite nonfiction writers in change, who wrote for the Harvard Business Review, when he wrote his book, Leading Change, I always talk about his schizophrenic change or something because he went from writing this academic stuff to writing in a voice that all of us could understand and relate to. That's what we want. So just dump it out. Write as you can. Just let it roll. Feel free to write badly. And then the last item is learn to write like you speak. Learn to write like you speak, not like other people want you to. Learn to write like you speak. And the caveat to that is be suspicious of writing courses where they want to tell you how to write literature in a specific way. If they want you to be John Steinbeck, don't do it. Worked for him. A lot of people, it's a downer to read some of that stuff. But the truth is he was a great writer, but he had a unique, here comes one of your questions, voice. He had a unique voice. And nobody can be like that. So don't try to be. Be yourself. Learn the craft, right? Do that. But sit down and write and let it rip. And then you're going to edit later. So just have fun with it. Just let it roll.
Good advice. Have you used a bubble map, like a story
Never.
where if you think about like how we sometimes will do stakeholder maps,
Mm-hmm.
you can use the
Sure.
bubble map and then kind of
Sure.
here's what we're doing and here's the different stakeholder groups. I was
No.
just curious if you've ever done that with
No.
stories, kind of that same idea of just kind of visualizing all the different elements and what is tied to each of those elements.
I tried that. I tried it with sticky notes and
Mhm.
with post-it notes on a wall and a post which took off some of the paint on my wall one
Oh
time.
no.
I know it was a bad choice, but and on bulletin boards and stuff, but I always ended up ignoring them because when you're writing fiction, once you have the characters, once you have this idea of this value you're going to deliver, the action, you have this basic outline, you go and you write against it. You write against it. It doesn't mean you're not taking notes on a yellow legal pad. It doesn't mean you're not going back and updating your character sketch. Of all the main characters in all my books, they would take up probably 15 pages of my character sketches. I've got probably 40 and 50 pages of them because I've got every little character that ever popped up. And you have to have something, and some people use that for the sticky notes for that or the bubbles for that in terms of relationships. For me, it just clutters the environment. And I don't want to force myself to be totally rational about this. I want to write. I want to tell the story. And then I'm going to go beat it up when I edit it to make sure that the flow is there and the characters are there and we have continuity amongst timelines and people's actions and who's showing up and what they look like. But no, I just 2 paragraphs, 2 chapters, an outline and get to it. That's the tools. And the occasional map of a site where you're going to go.
I like it. Good feedback. I have a question for you because you've talked about you're working on certain books and you have these things kind of in the back of your mind for the
Sure.
future that haven't actually come out
Oh,
yet. You're not
sure.
quite
Oh,
sharing that
sure.
secret, but you sound like for the most part you stay focused on one project. So are you a one project, like one at a time book, or do you juggle multiple ideas? And how do you stay motivated kind of mid-project and not get distracted by all these ideas?
It's a really good question because I'm a one project person. There's no question about that. I think so many funny stories that are metaphors for that. But I'm a one project person, but that doesn't mean ideas for other novels don't come up. They come up all the time, which is why I have my little leather bound notebook thing that, where I write things in, because it really bothers me if I lose those ideas. And I know that I will also never talk to people about my ideas for stories. And only a couple times, and I lose the stories if I do. So I'll write them down. But what's frustrating right now is there's so much publicity going on about homesick, and I'm writing columns for people and trying to write a novel and coming back to columns, which are writing in 500 words is way more hard than 95,000. But in doing that, it throws me off. So I haven't made any progress on His Brother's Keeper. I haven't had any. That's Sam 10 years later, but I haven't had made any progress on that because of the other things that are going on. I like to think that you've heard me say it in teaching too. I bet I'm the Winnie the Pooh of writing, just like I was the Winnie the Pooh of project management, the bare little brain. Checklists, move through an outline, go through, get it done. That's my focus, to be able to get things done. So no, the answer is no. But does that mean I don't have two more ideas for novels and that one that's in the can that really wants to come out? No, I have those. I have those. They bug me and they just pester me around the fringes. But I know I won't get done with one unless I just take it to the end.
So you have a Tigger inside that's trying to jump out.
I have a Tigger inside, and Winnie the Pooh and Owl are trying to keep things sane.
Yes. It's
Owl's
like
my
the
mentor,
multiple
by the way.
characters going.
My owl is named Katie, and she's an ambassador international. She's the one that keeps me oriented. I've got my head in the honey jar all the time. So
That's funny. How did you find your voice as a writer, and what do you wish someone had told you before you started?
you know, a writer's voice is not innate. They're not born with it. They're simply not born with it. So when I went to conferences, everybody says you got to find your voice, and I'm going, what? I have no idea what that means, right? The truth is it's learned by a writer. It's based on what they read, who they emulate as writers, what they learn from other writers, and how they talk naturally, because it's important to write as we talk. One of the most difficult things to learn, as I said earlier, is to write the way you talk. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to ramble on, forever. And I can do that. My wife always says, quit writing a book, get to the point, right? And she's not wrong, but we don't do that in a book. We want to be concise, brief, but without denuding our scenes and things like this, right? But, with all the learning behind them, when you are using your own words and when you go back and learn by editing your own stuff based on what you've learned, your voice shows up. I know it shows up. It's not something you try for. It's something that shows up. So I just really have a problem with instructors that say, this is how you find your voice, because there is no equation for it. It's learning, it's persistence and writing, it's editing, it's getting critiqued by other writers, really when they actually talk about, tell you what's good and bad and so on in your writing, usually in kind ways. When that happens, when you have that experience, your voice will show up. In one of the reviews that I got, oh gosh, I guess maybe there's in two of the reviews recently, that said that I have a very specific voice that's much like two writers, really, really good writers that I like to read. And I was sort of staggered. And then I was sort of confused, because I know that what I write is fast reading. It's fast paced stuff. And when I have a paragraph that's about 10 lines long, it's because I'm doing descriptive stuff, but you can count on stomping on the gas right after that. Apparently that sort of brevity, but that focus on scene and character is my voice. Who knew? I didn't know I had one. Honestly did not know I had one. Don't go trying to get one. Do not. If it shows up, and somebody says it, appreciate it, because I think it's based on everything you've learned, everything you've tried, everything you've fixed, and how you're carrying that stuff forward in your writing.
You
I feel
touched on,
strongly about that.
yeah, you touched on how people are giving you feedback and that helps you to find your voice, but how do you handle feedback and the
Oh,
vulnerability of sharing your work and like, you've kind of held on to your voice, but now they're telling you, hey, this or that should be in or should be out. How do you handle that?
I've been sort of blessed. When I first started writing short stuff so long ago, I took it personally when anybody edited my stuff. I didn't like it. I was offended. This is my creation. Until I met Zelma, my mentor, and she said, look, other people got to read this, got to make sense to them. So have somebody read it and look at their comments. The good news is you don't need to be threatened by them because you get to decide what you accept and what you don't. So where's the fear? Why get your hackles up? And then I felt really silly. She had a way of making me feel really silly. And so it was an absolutely great lesson. So what I have now is I have a thing called beta readers. And when I write a novel, I send them out to my volunteers who, you know, we like each other, but they don't love me so much that they won't tell me the truth. And they'll edit and they'll find things and they'll tell me I'm really messed that up and so on. So my rule is I accept everything they say. And then I go back. I may not change it the way they wanted me to change it, but I accept that there's a problem. And when I have my editor, even the one that deleted 10,000 words out of the home team, when I'm working with them, if it's small, happy, glad, or punctuation thing, happy is the same as glad, that's what I mean. Punctuation things, I accept across the board what they say. I don't debate it at all. And when they add comments to saying, Dave, this doesn't make sense, I recognize that it's the truth, right? To them, it didn't make sense, and that's a problem. So, you know, how do I handle criticism? I accept it, with a couple of exceptions. Reviews, I don't. I don't worry about. A famous writer once said, "Don't believe your own reviews," and I think there's some truth to it. Although it's nice to have, like, I've had this rash of really, really good reviews here in the last month on Home Team. Um, I love that part. I love the little old lady who was a reviewer who said, I don't read these books, but this was a lot of fun, right? And stuff like that. That's really great. But in one case on Home Team 2, which was about, as I said, human trafficking, I worked with Homeland Security Investigations, FBI, Washington State Patrol Joint Task Force to research that book and how it goes. And also a couple of friends that treat the victims of human trafficking. And that's what's in the book. And this one person who was commenting actually in a contest, fortunately, so it never saw print, she said, well, I'm a high school teacher and this is nonsense. This is not how this works. And that just shows that, you're going to have people that believe different things and you can't take that personally. And I'm going to stick to my guns on everything that's in the book in terms of its veracity. But then I had a review from a woman about a week ago that said, I don't read these books. There's too much action, too much violence. There's too much this stuff, right? And I thanked her for it. I said, I appreciated the time that she spends supporting readers and authors and stuff like this. And, the truth is, not everybody's going to like your writing. That is, it's not going to be right for everybody. My wife does not like my stories because they're so intense, but that's her personality and I love her for it. Thank goodness we have one sane person in the house, but, I think that criticism from people who are helping you, your editors, your beta readers, you've gotta accept it. I think though with reviewers, take it to heart, right? Try to understand where they're coming and appreciating their time, but not everybody's going to like what you write. You got to accept that.
You talked a little bit about your process working with your publishing group and accepting the stuff
Mhm.
that they tell you, but what surprised you most about the publishing process and what advice would you give someone that's trying to decide between, as you said in the beginning, when you published yourself, self-publishing, or maybe the more
Mhm.
traditional publishing groups?
Well, I think self-publishing is a valid approach. And there's not just self-publishing and traditional now. There's hybrid between the two, where you share some of the risk. And certainly have no problem with that because that's generally a full-service publisher. But I think that with self-publishing, depending on what your goal is, if you're writing something for your family, I wrote a little kids book, for my grandkids, right? Self-publishing is just fine. If you're going to write a good novel and self-publish it, then probably you're going to need to invest in an editor because your writing's not good enough. your perspective's not good enough. Most of us are humble enough to know that. So you're going to have to invest in an editor to help you. If you do that, then you have a really good chance of coming up with a pretty decent novel, right? A good writing. So self-publishing, pretty good stuff, depending on what you're at and how you approach it. My first book, Coyote Run, has 104 typos in it. I know, I counted every one of them because I didn't use an editor, right? So fortunately, the reader didn't mind, I guess. But with traditional, what's amazing is that, when I write a novel, I'll edit it between 5 and 7 times myself, I mean, including beta reader comments. And then I'll send it to the publisher, and they'll be, oh gosh, this last one, I can't, I stopped counting at the number of edits they made, but it'll come out so much better. As good as I try to make it, and I think by the time I cut it loose, I'm reading it and I'm satisfied. I mean, I'm feeling good and excited, and the weird ending that shows up surprises me, so I'm having a lot of fun. And then I send it to them, and they make it so much better. I mean, I have editors that take a sentence of 8 words, switch the position of 2 of them, eliminate one, and it entirely changes it and gives it more action and punch. So, with traditional, understand you get that benefit from your publisher, that editing and that support and cover and production and everything else, and probably marketing and self-publishing, going to market yourself. In traditional, they'll do a lot of it, although you're still called on to do a bunch. So the real downside about traditional publishing, if there is one, because it's harder to get accepted by a traditional publisher, is that it takes a long time. I spend a year writing a novel. I do a whole year, generally speaking, and that includes all the goofing off time. But then it takes a publisher another year to get it out, because my publisher is a small publisher, but they're putting out 350 books a year. Imagine Schuster and some of those that are putting out thousands of books a year, right? So the part to understand about that is patience, patience. And I love my team at Ambassador International. They are tremendous, tremendous, but it's harder to get there as opposed to self-publishing. I think that this hybrid is a new way for folks to get into small presses, right? And share some of the risk and the benefits of traditional. So I'd encourage people to seek that out. So they're both good. They're all good. It just depends on what you want.
I really appreciate all of your thoughts on the publishing process. And I'm hoping right now, can you tell us about the Home Team series, what themes anchor it, and what readers can expect from the third book?
Well, sure. I mean, with the exception of Home Team 2, which introduced Ellen Evander, as I said before earlier, the ex-Washington State Patrol trooper, the book in this series focuses on each of the members of the other 4 books, focus on each of the members of the Home Team, Sam Anthem and Home Team 1, Leah McCarthy and Homesick, which is the 3rd book, Alan Farrell and Finding Home, the 4th book, and Jessica Falcone, which is in a book that we may call Home Run or Homestand or Home something or other. In each novel, the team members uncover a conspiracy, wrestle with bad players, strive to overcome monumental mission-based and personal obstacles in each one of these, right? In each story, current topics are encountered by the team, and some form of innovative technology, like in LiDAR, and Home Team 2 when I used it there, and artificial intelligence and so on, and Home Team 4, and even quantum computing, which comes up in the 5th book, without a doubt. I think that the goal for each one of these, even though we bring in these characters and the conflict, the usual stuff, the conspiracies, is that the emphasis in all these books is an action-packed, fast read, but with rich characters that develop and are some that people can relate to, even though they have these top, what we call tier 1 or top tier skills in terms of covert operations. There are people that we all relate to, that are dealing with issues we can relate to, and addressing topics that we're all familiar with, at least peripherally. So one thing to count on, though, through all that is a fast-paced read. And I have a lot of fun adding these new things to each one of them. In the last book, for example, Jessica is a technology wizard as well as a political science specialist and a mixed martial artist champion, and Jessica has this depth, but she's also an introvert. go figure, that likes would rather be working with her horses than be out there with a crowd of people. And yet here she's has to confront this stuff. We can all deal with that. We all understand that in different ways. So that's where it's headed. And I think the readers can count on it. Since they're all 5 written, I can say that with some confidence, right?
I want to help the readers get to know you really well and as an author. And so I'm curious, what genre do you love most as a reader, and who are some of your favorite authors?
So, I mean, how much time you got? I mean, there's so many genres. I mean, I obviously love suspense and thrillers, but I'm a sucker for romance. There's no question about it. I love some of the character building that some of the romance writers do. But, you know, in authors, right now, a guy named Vince Flynn, who writes very much an action-oriented series, and Linda J. White, who writes a canine-based, a dog rescue-based romantic Christian suspense series, which I just love to death. They're so good. And these 2 guys, Andrews and Wilson. If you look up the authors, Andrews and Wilson, they've got so many books with their names on, from the Jack Ryan series from Ludlum to, the Shepherd series to a number of them, and just the best. In fact, oddly enough, I built a friendship with one of them because we tend to write the same sort of stuff. But so, I'm pretty eclectic in terms of what I like to read, and I will never get beyond science fiction. I don't know why writing this, maybe that shows up in my use of technology in my novels, but, a guy named Isaac Asimov who wrote I, Robot and some of those books, he and I corresponded when I was younger. And so I'm still hooked on that. So I wish I could give you a better answer. I love it all. And I believe strongly the key to being a good writer is to read. I mean, read it all. Just read it all. Don't read bad books. Throw them away. There's better ones out there. But, just read all different types because you get the ideas. I'll admit this. My favorite story of all time is John Carter of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. No question. That's the adventure book of 2 centuries. Read it all. I do.
It's funny, you made me think about a blog that I wrote a while back, actually, where I was reflecting back over my life and the different experiences I've had and where I've ended up, and how it was like a pointillism picture. And it kind of sounds like your writing is similar to that,
Yeah,
right? All
very
these
much.
different points have come together to create this series for you, this
Well,
book with the things you like. And
so well said.
yeah.
So well said. It's like, okay, here we go. Back to the beginning, project management. We know that in project management, our job is to deliver what the stakeholders need. So if you have those bubble maps with all the stakeholders, ultimately, all those come together at the point of the thing that we deliver that make their life better, their professional life better. What you're saying is all that experience that adds to the voice, like we talked about, all the stuff we think about and discover and have curiosity. In my case, quantum computing and quantum mechanics and stuff. Believe it or not, it's not going to overwhelm you in book number 5, but in fact, it's harder to know enough to be able to boil it down and use it. But when that stuff comes in, it all coalesces. That's where a book comes from. I mean, there will always be martial arts in my books. There will always be foreign stuff in different countries and different cultures. My team is based up at different genders and different cultures. It all comes together there for a writer. And I hope my writers see it, my readers see it.
Yep, that's your unique piece of art, your pointillism
Yeah,
story,
exactly
right?
right. Well said. Very well said. Yeah.
If someone was listening and thinking, maybe I could write a book, what would you say to them?
I'd say you should try. So many people want to and don't. I mean, the great American novel is almost a joke. It's such a trite statement. But, you don't have to write the great American novel. You can write a short family history that your family will cherish. I have several friends that were pioneers in the login area on Key Peninsula in Northwest Washington that wrote a history of their involvement with logging that's loved by people today, but maybe has a readership of 300 or 200. If you want to write the great American novel, there's room for it. Go do the things we talked about. Take courses, learn from other writers, persist, write, read. To be a writer, you have to write. So do it. Go ahead and take a shot at it. And if you don't get to do it all at once with a dramatic, fireworks at the end, it's okay, right? It's absolutely okay because you're writing for you. It's easier for me because I write Christian fiction And in our world, we say we write for one person and one person only, and that's him. That's God. God will take care of the rest. I love that perspective. But if you're not of our faith, you can write for your own imagination, your own family, your own purposes, and it'll be okay. So do it. Just write. Just do it. Don't hedge. Unless there's a really good football game on, then go watch the game, right?
Dave, I'm really glad that you joined me today. Thank you for sharing your insight, your stories, your encouragement. I know the listeners are going to take a lot away from this conversation. I wish you all the best in your new release, and I hope that you have a chance to talk with me again on a future podcast. And before we wrap up, I just want to know if you would share a website or best way for listeners to connect with you and explore more of your work.
Well, sure. I mean, in my website, which is daveprattbooks.com. I think that's a good place to go. I got to leave you with that one. There's certainly other venues for that, like on Amazon Author and so on. But yeah, go there.
So, from Hardy Boys to Home Team, Dave's journey reminds us that every reader has a story waiting to be written, and that persistence is what helps us turn that story into a book. I would love to hear from listeners who are on their own writing journey. I'm sure Dave would as well. So, feel free to drop a comment. We would love to hear your story. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again next time. And thank you, Dave, for being here. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.